Well, it was another weekend filled with peace, love, and justice in the city so nice they named it twice. Pro-Palestine mobs took to the streets to rip down American flags, block traffic, and yet another mostly peaceful act. They surrounded Grand Central Station and attempted to breach the outer doors to attack the police officers sheltering inside. It's rather hard to believe and even more difficult to swallow that a mere 22 years after Muslim terrorists crashed planes into the Twin Towers on September 11th, killing thousands of innocent Americans, our leaders are now fully allowing pro-Palestinian mobs to rip down American flags, and on Veterans Day, no less. Is that what Islamophobia looks like? I'm confused. I've asked this before, but it's worth begging the question once again. If you're Jewish and still planning to vote Democrat, why? Just why? Furthermore, after the summer riot season of 2020 and now the open support of terrorism in your streets, if you still choose to live in New York City, why? Just why? Because yes, while Muslim terrorists would love to exterminate and slaughter Jews, don't be fooled, they want to kill us all, and the members of the rainbow crowd would be the first to go. Yet America continues to allow it. And as for our institutions of higher learning, well, they too sit idly by and coddle it because, get this, if they were to suspend students participating in these anti-Israel, anti-Semitic events, those students might get deported because they aren't citizens. Yeah, no joke. Our American universities are not only holding water for pro-Hamas students, but holding water for pro-Hamas non-citizen students. If you're a non-citizen ripping down American flags, intimidating Americans, and vandalizing our property, you should be deported immediately because we owe you nothing, so goodbye. But it's not just the non-citizen students to blame, of course. Plenty of middle to upper class privileged college brats join in on this. But why and how? How has this pro-Hamas propaganda infiltrated our college system? Who is really driving the grassroots anti-Israel activism right here in America? Well, it turns out there is research that answers that very question. And joining me now to help us wade through it all and understand it is my friend and Israeli political strategist, Philippe Azzaline. Philippe, it's great to have you back so soon. I'm so happy we're diving into this. Obviously, a couple weeks ago, we had you talking about the aftermath of the terror attacks in Israel, but these pro-Palestinian, free Palestine, Gaza, whatever, they want to call themselves, still in the streets on a weekly basis, still taking over entire swaths of the world with their activism. It doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon, but Philippe, they're talking about this being about a ceasefire. I'm not convinced that that's really what this is about.
No, first of all, Tomi, it's great to be back and nice to see you again. I asked myself the questions you asked in your introduction and your monologue. How is it that they're getting so many students to follow them? How can you get, we spoke about it last time, queers for justice in Palestine when right now, they'd be killed by Hamas. It's pretty obvious. These are not pro-Palestinian groups, really. They're anti-Western groups. And what I was able to discover, I used to be a litigator. I couldn't figure out what was happening. But what I was able to discover was that they managed to make their propaganda appealing the way brands work, the way drugs work. They make it easy and emotionally satisfying. And that way they're able to, and by saying they, I mean, these are groups that originally were funded by the KGB, and now it's funded by groups that are associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. They're able to make it very, very appealing for young Americans to feel kinship with the Palestinian cause and hatred for Israel.
Yeah, it's quite obvious that it's working. I've talked about this for weeks now. It feels like there is a segment of these protesters who really maybe are evil and hate Jewish people and hate Israel, and they've been born and bred to believe that. But it seems like there's also another segment of these protest activist groups that really are, as you said, they don't really know what they're out there for. They would never journey to Gaza. They would never put themselves in a precarious situation, but they feel like they might. Who knows? Maybe they're that dumb. But
brainwashed. A lot of them end up going. But look, what you're saying is absolutely true. And that's the real danger. You have something that's operating where you have a core, foreign money, using this as a weapon for Hamas, right? It's not a ceasefire, like you said. It's to protect Hamas. Israel wins. So there's a ceasefire, right? We need a ceasefire. If Hamas was fighting, nobody would be calling. If Hamas was winning, it's still firing rockets at us. But if Hamas were winning, they would never be calling for a ceasefire. So it's this group, political, funded from abroad, originally related to the USSR, that's manipulating Americans from within. Started with Edward Said. And through my work now, what I do is polling to try to understand the deeper psychological reasons people are drawn to ideas and brands. And it's the same thing. And it kind of works like drugs. So they'll go to, you have the woke movement in the US and identity politics, which is dividing everybody. So people need to feel belonging. They need to feel solidarity. So they'll go to Black students and tell them, hey, you're fighting racism. Israel's racist against Palestinians. They'll go to Mexican students, and you can see this in pictures. It's flagrant. The cultural appropriation is brazen. And they'll go, while they're increasing division through woke and identity politics, they're going to Mexican students saying, you have to face offense, we have offense. They're going to evangelical students and telling them Jesus was a Palestinian. They're now claiming abortion is somehow related to justice in Palestine, which means really erasing Israel. Like, they're really going to every group and co-opting them emotionally. Imagine being alone in high school and your only friend comes. The only person who wants to be your friend is a kind of bully, but they tell you, hey, I'm your friend, I'm the same as you. It's very tempting to fall into that. Once you've fallen into that, you'll believe anything. And that's what we're missing, the emotional ingredient here. It works like a drug. It's seduction. And it's done entirely to advance military and political aims. And I can prove it. I mean, it sounds dramatic. It sounds wrong. It's scary to think our students, and when I was at UCLA, I saw it happening. It's scary to think students in North America are being indoctrinated this way, but they are. This is not genuine grassroots activism. It's being funded and manipulated by specific people and from money from different places.
Talk to me about Students for Justice in Palestine. That name comes up a lot. It sounds like a really pure and moral and noble name, but when you dig into it, probably not so much. What do you know about that group? What can you tell us?
Yeah. So they're responsible for a lot of the hate on campus. And when I say this, I'm not fighting Palestinian grievances. Justice for Palestinians matters. Israel, like I say every time, makes a ton of mistakes. And I can't look at the images on TV and not have empathy and compassion for Palestinians. I'm a father and I see children and I suffer. But they're not advancing Palestinian rights, or they'd be fighting Hamas. They are groups started by the American Muslims for Palestine, which is a group that came in turn from the Islamic Association for Palestine, which the FBI said was related to the Muslim Brotherhood. There's one guy at Berkeley called Hatem Bazian who's been instrumental in connecting that kind of anti-Jewish, anti-Western ideology and camouflaging it as a leftist ideology and making alliances with leftist groups on campus. And the IAP in 2005, the FBI said it was related to the Muslim Brotherhood. This was in the wake of 9/11. In turn, those organizations were related to MAS, the Muslim Muslim American Society, I believe, and ICNA, the Islamic Circle of North America. Now, this is research I did a few years back, but you can look into it, and I think it's still quite relevant. And when they are in their conferences, they make very different declarations, right? The guy tearing down the American flag at Veterans Day, which is insane arrogance and lack of gratitude. What you were hearing in the background was the Islamic Declaration of Faith. It wasn't anything to do with Palestinian rights. If people were saying ceasefire, get rid of Hamas, find a peaceful solution, I'd probably be supporting them. But this was tearing down a flag, so they're angry at the US on Veterans Day and chanting an Islamic Declaration of Faith. There's that poison behind a lot of this, not all of it, but a lot of it. And that's what's scary. That's what's dangerous. It's disingenuous. And so many students have been seduced by it that now you have violence. Now you have students chanting for Hamas, not Palestinian rights, right? They're like defending people who mass rape women, rape culture. Woke students are defending rape culture.
Yeah. Well, it's similar to the BLM movement that we saw, of course, hit a fever pitch in 2020, where looting and rioting was also excused in the name of George Floyd. So these people are clearly impressionable. But you brought up certain chants, certain Islamic chants. That's why I want to ask you about this. We have a congresswoman named Rashida Tlaib, and she has been censored because of her numerous what I would call anti-Semitic rhetoric, the times that she's done this. But she attempted to explain away the chant from the river to the sea, saying that it was an aspirational chant about freedom and human rights. Most people didn't see it that way, but I would love to get your take on what that phrase means and what you think she intended it for it to mean.
So I'll address both the things you raised. Black Lives Matter is a movement that was completely hijacked by SJP type people. Very early on, look, it's very hard for anybody, I think, to not be sensitive to racism, right? America has a history. My own parents are refugees. They fled. North Africa because of racism. So initially, I think we would all be well disposed to it. However, from the beginning, the SJP crowd hijacked that movement. It said from Ferguson to Palestine, occupation is a crime. One of the first chants. That has nothing to do with black rights. Just like from the river to the sea, it's always catchy. It's always junk food for the brain. It's always easy to remember. From the river to the sea has nothing to do with human rights. You want human rights? You get rid of Hamas. You give Palestinians democracy and individual rights, the right to be free, the right to be Christian or Jewish or whatever they might want. They don't have that. From the rivers to the sea is the right of Arabs to control the entire Middle East. And sometimes when they say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, in Arabic, they say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be Arab. And so there's a lot of duplicity here. Rashida Tlaib is a hypocrite. She knows very well that this has nothing to do with human rights. It's about eliminating Israel. And it's not about eliminating Israel through ballots or peacefully. It's what we saw, right? It's after what we saw. It takes a grotesque level of insensitivity, but also of hypocrisy to say that's about human rights after what we saw.
Yeah, no doubt. I saw something actually put out by Piers Morgan this morning, and I thought it was interesting. It was kind of a letter to the editor that was in, I believe, a newspaper in London, but it said of all the protests going on in the United States and London and around the world, this Free Palestine, talking about a ceasefire, you didn't see anybody holding up signs, free the hostages, and maybe saying, hey, if Hamas would unconditionally, no conditions, release all the hostages, there could be a ceasefire. That's not on the table at all here. It's give us 6,000 of our fighters back and we'll give you 200 hostages. But it's not, there hasn't been calls for release the hostages and then we'll have a humanitarian pause that they claim that they want. Interesting, no, nobody's really picking on that.
It's a political weapon, the same way AJ Plus was a political weapon. That even a lot of the Arab states banned AJ Plus because it was influencing people for Islamist ideas posing as human rights. Ceasefire means protect Hamas. They're not asking for Hamas to stop firing rockets. They're telling Israel, stop fighting Hamas. Now, the tragedy is you have a lot of civilian suffering, a lot of Palestinian children, cute kids. I would love to even, be friends with my kids. They're suffering tremendously, but that's because of what Hamas does. And nobody wants to even talk about that. Now, I can understand these organizations who are a front for political aims don't do it. But why doesn't the press do it? Why is the press always putting the suffering of Palestinians in people's living rooms and taking advantage of Americans' kindness, but never taking the extra step of saying, what can we do to actually stop this, right? What can we do? Who's actually responsible for this at the end of the day? Is it the people trying to get rid of terrorists, or is it the people building a headquarters in a hospital? Precisely because if Israel attacks, they can then say, look, Israel are barbarians.
Right. Well, the solution to peace in the Middle East is not one that you and I are going to come up with today. But do you think that there is maybe a solution or steps that could be taken, at least as it relates to college kids here in the United States, maybe in the UK as well, to understand that the groups that they're advocating for are not the groups that they believe that they are, or some way to break this propaganda cycle? Is there anything that can be done at this point?
I think the reason I'm so grateful you bring up the propaganda all the time, and you're one of the only people who do it that I've spoken to, is that the more we speak about it, the more people might become aware of how they're being manipulated. I don't have any problem people being pro-Palestinian. I have a problem with people being manipulated into hating innocent people and thinking that's helping Palestinians. It doesn't. So I think awareness is very important, and it's not even close to where it needs to be. There also needs to be a sexier message on the other side. Now, when it comes to the Middle East itself for peace, I have to be optimistic. I tell you this every time because I have kids here. I think the press is the biggest problem. When you keep treating Hamas now and the Palestinians always as victims, it's a victory for terrorist groups. Terrorist groups love being the victims. This is what they feed on. Nasrallah, on Saturday, the leader of Hezbollah, said, look, the world is realizing we're victims and it's opposing Israel. This for them is a victory. And Israelis, who just came out of a genocide 80 years ago within living memory, feel besieged. And they're like, everybody's unfair with us. We can't listen to anybody. We got to be like mama bear on our guard to protect our children. So it creates more war to pity the Palestinians. This is not to say we shouldn't have empathy. We should have tremendous empathy. But that means looking at the real root cause and no longer having sympathy with groups like Hamas, who are funded by Iran, Qatar, other places, and enjoy now this support on US campuses that is for them like oxygen.
Right. Well, and also it would be nice to see the Jewish students on campus get some support from administrations that would be a good step. There are some Americans, some heavyweight Jewish Americans that are sounding the alarm and having real impact. I guess I'm grateful to them for using their voice and their platform. Not many are willing to do it on the Jewish side, on the Jewish American side. So I'm happy to see that. Maybe that will carry some weight. But until then, I think it's just up to, again, parents to educate their children, hopefully from a young age, to question everything.
TikTok is there was an article that came up in the New York Times 2 weeks ago, I believe, about how China is using social media to push pro-Hamas messages. TikTok is overwhelmingly, if the research I saw is to be believed, pro-Hamas. Now, my research is in why the messaging connects with young people's emotions, right? Like the way brands do. Like that's what I look at, and why is it appealing to them? I look at also, I'm starting to look at like the quantity of bots and the amount of repetition. Repetition is how we learn. And so that's also got to be talked about. There's talk about Russian disinformation all the time, but here's a really live case of Chinese involvement through TikTok that also is playing a bad role in what young Americans are made to believe.
Also interesting, because I don't think that you would see anything on TikTok talking about the human rights abuses of the Chinese Communist Party, of which there are many. You won't see that on TikTok. You won't see justice for those marginalized groups in China, but you'll see plenty of pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine. Again, TikTok is a mind virus. It's brain numbing. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going anywhere. So the understanding of it.
Sorry to interrupt you, Tomi, but I think it's important that I mention this. I've been amazed by the number of Arabs, including Arab Israelis, but not just, Palestinians, not just the son of the Hamas founder. A lot of Palestinians are starting to speak up. Now, if they speak up, their lives are in danger. And a lot of Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians have been speaking up. And that doesn't mean they're pro-Israel. That doesn't mean they agree with everything Israel does. It might even mean they don't agree with Israel's founding. But they are starting to speak up about the evil that is Hamas. And I think that is also going to be part of the solution.
That's great to hear. We hope for more of that bravery. Philippe, as always, I appreciate you being here, for spreading the word and giving us some insight into the manipulation that's going on, certainly in the United States and around the world. Stay safe, my friend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Good to see you.